The Legendary Origin of Fartman. Chapter 1. A Hero's Failed Beginnings. Gary Winderson was not what you'd call superhero material. At 42 years old, he sported a magnificent potbelly that preceded him into every room like a fleshy herald announcing his arrival. His apartment was decorated in what interior designers might call early bachelor disaster. Empty beer cans formed pyramids on every surface, and his coffee table had permanent ring stains that told the story of 1,000 forgotten coasters. But Gary had a dream. Every night, after his shift at the DMV, where he processed driver's license renewals with the enthusiasm of a sloth on sedatives, Gary would return home, crack open a Bud Light, and watch superhero movies. His eyes would glaze over with wonder as Superman soared across the screen, as Batman brooded magnificently in his cave, as the Flash zipped through Central City, saving the day before lunch. "I could do that," Gary would mutter to himself, taking another swig of beer. "I've got what it takes." He did not, in fact, have what it takes. His first attempt at superheroism came on a Tuesday. Gary had watched all 3 Christopher Reeve Superman movies back to back, along with 8 beers, and decided he was ready. He fashioned a cape from his mother's old red curtains. She'd been asking for them back for 3 years, and climbed to the roof of his apartment building. "Up, up, and away!" Gary shouted, running toward the edge with his arms outstretched. What followed was not flight, but rather a graceless tumble into Mrs. Henderson's prize-winning azalea bushes. Gary limped away with a sprained ankle, 17 scratches, and the distinct impression that maybe super strength wasn't his thing. Mrs. Henderson's impression was that Gary was an idiot, which she shared loudly with the entire neighborhood association. Undeterred and slightly concussed, Gary moved on to Plan B, becoming like Batman. He spent his entire paycheck on black clothing from Hot Topic, much to the confusion of the teenage cashier who asked if he was going through something. He even tried to order a Batmobile online, but apparently those weren't available on eBay. And the closest thing he could afford was a used 1997 Honda Civic with a mysterious stain in the back seat. "The Bat Civic," Gary announced proudly to his friend Derek, who had stopped by with more beer. "That's just a regular Civic, Gary," Derek said, examining the vehicle with concern. "And I think that stain is that ketchup or blood? It's mystery," Gary said dramatically. Batman is all about mystery. Gary's career as a Batman-type hero lasted exactly 1 night. He tried to grapple hook onto a building using a rope and a bent coat hanger. Instead, he got tangled in the rope, dangled upside down from a fire escape for 40 minutes, and had to be rescued by the fire department. The local news covered it with the headline, "Local Man Rescued," after attempting to be like Batman, but sadder. His final attempt came after a flash marathon. Gary laced up his old high school sneakers, which barely fit over his swollen feet, and prepared to run at super speed through the city, fighting crime with velocity and justice. He made it half a block before stopping to catch his breath. The 6-pack of beer sloshing in his belly wasn't helping. Neither was the fact that he'd eaten an entire large pizza before attempting this feat. Gary bent over, hands on his knees, wheezing like a broken accordion. "This is it," he gasped to no one in particular. "I'm done. I'll never be a superhero." Chapter 2. The Bar of Destiny. That Friday night, Gary met his friends Derek and Tommy at their usual haunt, the Rusty Tap, a dive bar that smelled like broken dreams and discount cleaning products. The bar's main appeal was that it was cheap, dark enough that you couldn't see the health code violations, and the owner, Big Pete, never judged anyone for anything. Gary slumped onto his usual stool with the weight of a man whose dreams had been thoroughly crushed by reality. "Rough week?" Derek asked, though he already knew the answer. "I'm giving up," Gary announced, signaling Big Pete for a beer. No more superhero stuff. I'm just going to accept that I'm a regular guy with a regular life who processes regular driver's licenses for regular people. That's the spirit, Tommy said, clapping him on the back. Mediocrity is underrated. Big Pete slid a beer across the bar with the precision of a man who'd been doing it for 30 years. You look like you need some comfort food, Gary. Made my famous 15-bean chili today. It's got kidney beans, black beans, pinto beans, navy beans, lima beans, garbanzo beans, great northern beans, cannellini beans, black-eyed peas, lentils, split peas, fava beans, adzuki beans, mung beans, and a secret 15th bean I'll never reveal. That's only 14, Derek pointed out. The 15th is mystery, Big Pete said with a wink. Gary shrugged. Sure, why not? Bring me a bowl. The chili arrived in a bowl the size of a small bathtub, steaming and bubbling like a witch's cauldron. Gary took one bite, and his eyes widened. It was delicious, rich, spicy, with a complex flavor profile that suggested Big Pete had missed his calling as a gourmet chef. This is incredible, Gary mumbled through a mouthful. Pete, you're a genius. I know, Big Pete said modestly. Want another bowl? Gary nodded enthusiastically. Then he had a third bowl, then a fourth. Derek and Tommy watched with a mixture of awe and concern as their friend consumed what had to be several pounds of bean-based cuisine. Between bowls, Gary munched on the complimentary peanuts that sat in bowls along the bar, the kind of peanuts that had probably been touched by hundreds of unwashed hands, but tasted salty and perfect nonetheless. Gary, maybe you should slow down, Tommy suggested. That's a lot of beans. I'm drowning my sorrows in legumes, Gary declared, signaling for bowl number 5. Leave me alone. About halfway through the 5th bowl, something strange happened. Gary felt a warmth spreading through his body, not the usual warmth of beer, but something different, something powerful. His muscles seemed to tingle with energy. He felt strong. Guys, Gary said slowly, I feel weird. You ate 5 bowls of 15-bean chili, Derek said. Of course you feel weird. But it wasn't just weird. Gary felt pressure building inside him, a tremendous, mounting pressure that seemed to originate from deep within his digestive system. His eyes widened as he realized what was coming. Oh no, he whispered. What? Tommy asked. Oh no, oh no, oh no. And then it happened. The fart that emerged from Gary Winderson that night would go down in history, though most of that history would be stricken from official records due to its sheer impossibility. It started as a low rumble, like distant thunder, then built to a crescendo that shook the bottles behind the bar. The sound was magnificent and terrible, a symphony of flatulence that seemed to contain multitudes. The force of it was even more impressive than the sound. Derek and Tommy were blown clean off their bar stools, tumbling backward like bowling pins. Other patrons grabbed onto tables and chairs as the shockwave rippled through the bar. Gary himself was propelled forward off his stool, rocketing across the room with his arms windmilling wildly. He actually flew across the entire length of the rusty tap before crashing into a stack of beer cases near the back wall. For a moment, there was absolute silence. Then Big Pete started laughing. Holy hell, Gary! What was that? Gary stood up slowly, checking himself for injuries. He was fine. Better than fine. He felt amazing, energized, powerful. He looked down at his hands, then back at the bar stool he'd been sitting on 20 feet away. I flew, he said in wonder. I actually flew. Derek pulled himself up from the floor, his hair blown back like he'd stuck his finger in an electrical socket. You didn't fly, you idiot. You farted so hard you became a human rocket. But Gary wasn't listening. His mind was racing, connecting dots, seeing possibilities. He'd tried to be Superman, Batman, the Flash, but maybe his superpower had been inside him all along. Literally inside him. In his digestive system. "Guys," Gary said, his voice trembling with excitement. "I think I just found my superpower." Tommy groaned from where he'd landed near the jukebox. "Please tell me you're not thinking what I think you're thinking." Gary's face split into a huge grin. "I'm going to be a superhero after all." "Based on farting?" Derek asked incredulously. "Based on powered flight through strategic gas propulsion," Gary corrected him. "There's a difference." Big Pete was still chuckling behind the bar. "Well, if you're gonna be a fart-powered superhero, you're gonna need a lot more of my chili." Gary turned to him with the intensity of a man who'd just found his life's purpose. "Pete, I'm going to need you to make me chili every single day. Can you do that?" "For the right price, I can do anything," Big Pete said. "But Gary, you realize this is insane, right?" "All the best superheroes are a little insane," Gary said confidently. "Now, I need to go home and design a costume." Chapter 3. The Birth of Fartman. Gary spent the entire weekend working on his superhero identity. His apartment looked like a combination of a tailor's workshop and a mad scientist's laboratory. Fabric was strewn everywhere, along with sketches, diagrams, and an alarming number of empty bean cans. The costume itself was a work of art, or at least, Gary thought so. He'd chosen brown and green as his primary colors, earthy tones for an earthy power. He'd explained to Derek, who'd stopped by to check on him. The suit was form-fitting, perhaps too form-fitting, given Gary's physique with a large F emblazoned on the chest in bold yellow letters. But the pièce de résistance was the rear flap. Gary had spent hours engineering a spring-loaded panel that covered his posterior. With the press of a button on his belt, the flap would snap open, allowing for maximum thrust potential while maintaining some semblance of dignity. The flap was reinforced with metal hinges and had a satisfying snap sound when it opened. "It's perfect," Gary said, modeling the costume for Derek. "It's ridiculous," Derek corrected. "You look like a brown and green sausage with a butt door." "I look like justice," Gary said firmly. "Fartman, defender of the innocent, protector of the weak, fighter of crime through the power of flatulence. You workshopped that name, right? Considered alternatives?" "For hours. But Fartman is honest. It's direct. People will know exactly what they're getting," Derek sighed. "And the flap? That's really necessary?" Gary pressed the button on his belt, and the rear flap snapped open with mechanical precision. "Absolutely necessary. I did some test runs without the flap. I kept blowing out the seat of my pants. Do you know how expensive it is to keep replacing pants?" "I'm guessing you're about to tell me." "Derek, I've spent $347 on new underwear and pants in the last 3 days alone. All from Amazon Prime. My delivery driver thinks I have a serious problem." The flap is a cost-saving measure and a practical design choice. To prove his point, Gary had Derek accompany him to the roof for a test flight. Gary had consumed a large bowl of Big Pete's chili an hour earlier and was feeling the familiar pressure building. "Stand back," Gary warned, positioning himself at the edge of the roof. He pressed the button on his belt, and the flap snapped open. Then, with a look of intense concentration, he released his power. The result was spectacular. A jet of propulsive force erupted from Gary's posterior, launching him into the night sky. He soared upward, arms outstretched, cape flapping behind him. He'd kept the cape from his Superman attempt. Waste not, want not. For a glorious 15 seconds, Gary Winderson flew above the city like a majestic, flatulent eagle. Then the power ran out, and he began to descend. Fortunately, he'd planned for this and managed to guide himself back to the roof, landing with only moderate clumsiness. "It works!" Gary shouted triumphantly. "Derek, did you see that?" "I flew." Derek was holding his nose. "I saw it. I also smelled it." "Gary, that was really something." "The more beans I eat, the longer I can fly," Gary explained excitedly. "I've been doing experiments. 1 bowl of chili gives me about 30 seconds of flight time. 2 bowls, maybe a minute. I haven't tested the upper limits yet, but the possibilities are endless." "The smell is also endless," Derek muttered. "Seriously, we need to go inside. I think you just killed Mrs. Henderson's azaleas again." But Gary was too excited to care about azaleas. He had a superpower. He had a costume. Now all he needed was a crime to fight. Chapter 4. Fartman's first mission. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Gary, now Fartman, had been patrolling the city for 3 nights without incident. He'd consumed so much of Big Pete's chili that Pete had started buying beans in bulk from a restaurant supplier. Gary's apartment now had a dedicated chili fridge that contained nothing but containers of bean-based fuel. On the 4th night, while soaring above downtown, powered by 2.5 bowls of chili, Fartman heard screaming. He adjusted his trajectory, following the sound to Jefferson Elementary School. A school bus was parked at an odd angle in the parking lot, and smoke was pouring from its engine. Worse, Fartman could see flames beginning to lick up from under the hood, and inside the bus, he could see children. "Oh no," Fartman muttered. "Oh no, this is it. This is my moment." The bus driver was frantically trying to open the emergency exit, but something was jammed. The front door was blocked by the angle of the bus against a light pole. The children, about 15 of them, all elementary age, were screaming and crying as smoke filled the interior. Fartman didn't hesitate. He angled himself downward, released a controlled burst of propulsion, and rocketed toward the bus. He landed on the roof with a heavy thud that dented the metal. "Never fear, children," he shouted. "Fartman is here." Inside the bus, the screaming briefly stopped as the children processed what they'd just heard. "Did he say Fartman?" one little girl asked. "I think he said Fartman," a boy confirmed. "That's a weird name for a superhero," another child observed. Another child observed, but Fartman was already in action. He grabbed the emergency exit hatch and pulled with all his might. The beans had given him not just flight, but enhanced strength. The hatch tore free with a screech of metal. "Everybody out," Fartman commanded. "Single file. No pushing." The children scrambled up and out through the roof hatch. Fartman helped each one, lifting them out and setting them safely on the ground. The smoke was getting thicker, and he could hear the fire spreading. He had maybe 30 seconds before the whole thing went up. "Is that everyone?" he asked the last child, a small boy with glasses. "Mrs. Patterson is still in there," the boy said, pointing. "She's the bus driver. She's stuck." Fartman looked down through the hatch and saw the driver slumped over the wheel, unconscious from smoke inhalation. The front of the bus was engulfed in flames now. "Stay here," Fartman told the children. Then he dropped down into the smoke-filled bus. The heat was intense, and the smoke burned his lungs. Fartman stumbled forward, grabbed Mrs. Patterson under the arms, and dragged her toward the back of the bus. But the emergency exit was too high. He couldn't lift her up and out while standing inside. He needed more power. Fortunately, Fartman had prepared for emergencies. He reached into a pouch on his belt and pulled out what he called his emergency bean rations, a Ziploc bag filled with cold, cooked beans. He shoved a handful into his mouth and chewed frantically. The effect was almost immediate. Power surged through him. He felt the pressure building. Fartman positioned himself under Mrs. Patterson, pressed the button on his belt to open the rear flap, and released everything he had. The resulting blast propelled both of them straight up and out of the bus like a rocket. They shot into the air, Fartman holding onto the unconscious driver, and landed in a heap on the grass about 20 feet away. Just in time. The bus exploded in a fireball that lit up the night sky. The children cheered. Fire trucks and ambulances were arriving, their sirens wailing. Paramedics rushed to Mrs. Patterson, who was already starting to cough and come around. "You saved us," the little girl from earlier said, running up to Fartman. "You're a real superhero." Fartman stood up, trying to look heroic despite being covered in soot and smelling like a combination of smoke and beans. "Just doing my duty. Citizen. Fartman protects the innocent." "But why do you smell so bad?" another child asked innocently. That's part of my power," Fartman explained. "Sometimes heroism doesn't smell great." A news van was pulling up. Fartman realized this was his moment, his big debut. But he also realized that he'd used up all his propulsion saving Mrs. Patterson. He couldn't fly away dramatically. He'd have to walk. "I must go," he announced to the children. "Crime never sleeps. And neither does Fartman. It's only 8 p.m., one kid pointed out. "Evil doesn't follow a schedule," Fartman declared, then turned and jogged away into the darkness with as much dignity as he could muster. Behind him, the paramedics were opening all the ambulance doors and windows. One of them radioed for air fresheners. A lot of air fresheners. Chapter 5. Fame, Fortune, and Laundry Problems. The next morning, Gary woke up to find himself famous. "Mysterious Hero Saves Children from Burning Bus," read the headline in the local paper. The article described a brown and green costumed vigilante who had rescued 15 children and their bus driver from certain death. Several children were quoted describing the hero's unique propulsion system and memorable aroma. Gary's phone was ringing off the hook. Derek called first. "Dude, you're on the news. They're calling you the flatulent defender." "I prefer Fartman," Gary said. But he was grinning. He'd done it. He'd actually saved people. Tommy called next. "Gary, this is insane. You're a real superhero." Also, the news is reporting that the fire department had to use 17 air fresheners at the scene. 17. Small price to pay for justice, Gary said proudly. Big Pete called to congratulate him and offer unlimited chili at a discounted rate. "You're good for business, Gary. People are coming in asking about the bean chili that powers the hero. I'm thinking of renaming it Fartman's Fuel." But with fame came complications. The first problem was the laundry situation. Despite the spring-loaded flap, Gary was still going through underwear at an alarming rate. The sheer force of his powers meant that even with the flap open, there was collateral damage. He'd set up a recurring Amazon Prime order for underwear, 30 pairs every week, and his delivery driver had started leaving them on the porch without ringing the doorbell, along with concerned notes. "Mr. Winderson," read one note, "I don't know what's going on in your life, but there are resources available if you need help. Also, maybe see a doctor. Marcus, your Amazon driver." Gary's credit card bill was becoming a problem. Between the underwear, the chili, the costume repairs, the flap mechanism needed, frequent maintenance, and the industrial-strength air fresheners he felt obligated to leave at rescue sites, he was spending more than he made at the DMV. "I need a sponsor," Gary told Derek over beers at the Rusty Tap. "Batman has Wayne Enterprises. Iron Man has Stark Industries. I have a DMV salary and a crippling underwear addiction. Have you considered that maybe this superhero thing isn't sustainable? Derek suggested gently, but Gary was undeterred. Over the next few weeks, Fartman became a fixture in the city. He stopped a robbery at a convenience store. The robbers surrendered immediately after one blast, citing cruel and unusual punishment. He rescued a cat from a tree, though the cat seemed traumatized afterward. He even helped an elderly woman cross the street. She thanked him, but asked him to please stay downwind. Every rescue ended the same way. Fartman would fly off into the sunset, and the people he'd saved would immediately start opening windows and deploying air fresheners. The local Glade factory reported record sales. But Gary was happy. For the first time in his life, he had purpose. He was making a difference. Sure, his apartment smelled like a bean factory, and his Amazon driver had started wearing a gas mask. But he was a hero. Then he met Sarah. Chapter 6. Love in the Time of Legumes. It happened at Big Pete's bar on a Tuesday night. Gary was there in civilian clothes, eating his usual pre-patrol chili, when a woman sat down 2 stools away. She was pretty, really pretty, with dark hair, kind eyes, and a smile that made Gary's heart do a little flip. She ordered a beer and some nachos, and Gary found himself stealing glances at her between spoonfuls of beans. "That's a lot of chili," she observed, noticing him working on his 3rd bowl. Gary froze, spoon halfway to his mouth. "Oh, yeah, I really like beans." "I can see that," she said with a laugh. "I'm Sarah, by the way." "Gary?" he managed, trying to sound casual, and not like a man who'd eaten approximately 4 pounds of beans in the last hour. They started talking. Sarah was a teacher at Jefferson Elementary, the same school where Fartman had saved the bus. She told Gary all about the mysterious hero who'd rescued her students. "It was amazing," she said, her eyes lighting up. "This guy in a brown and green costume just appeared out of nowhere. The kids said he flew, but that seems impossible, right?" Gary nodded, trying to look skeptical. "Totally impossible. Flying that's not a thing people can do. But he saved them all, Mrs. Patterson too. He's a real hero, even if he has a weird name and smells like, well, the kids said he smelled pretty bad." "Maybe he has a medical condition," Gary suggested. "Maybe," Sarah agreed. "But you know what? I don't care if he smells like a dumpster behind a burrito restaurant. He saved my kids. That makes him beautiful to me." Gary felt his heart swell. Here was someone who appreciated Fartman, who saw past the smell to the heroism underneath. He wanted to tell her the truth right then and there, but something held him back. What if she didn't believe him? What if she thought he was crazy? They talked for 2 more hours. Sarah was funny, smart, and passionate about teaching. Gary found himself laughing more than he had in years. When she finally had to leave, she gave him her number. "Call me," she said. "I'd like to do this again." Gary watched her go, feeling like he was floating, and not because of bean-powered propulsion. Derek, who'd been watching from the other end of the bar, came over with a knowing grin. "You like her?" "I really like her," Gary admitted. "You gonna tell her you're Fartman? Eventually?" "Maybe. I don't know." Gary stared at his phone, where Sarah's number was now saved. What if she thinks it's gross? "Gary, she literally just told you she thinks Fartman is a hero despite the smell. I think you're good." But Gary wasn't sure. Over the next few weeks, he and Sarah went on several dates. They went to movies, had dinner, took walks in the park. Gary was happier than he'd been in years. But he was also living a double life by day. He was Gary Winderson, DMV employee, and Sarah's boyfriend. By night, he was Fartman, defender of justice and consumer of beans. The secret was eating at him. Literally and figuratively, he was eating so many beans to maintain his hero schedule that his digestive system was in a constant state of chaos. His Amazon underwear orders had increased to 40 pairs a week. Marcus, the delivery driver, had started leaving pamphlets for gastroenterologists. The crisis came on a Friday night. Gary and Sarah had plans for a nice dinner at an Italian restaurant. But just as Gary was getting ready, he heard sirens. He looked out his window and saw smoke rising from downtown. His phone buzzed. It was a news alert. Fire at downtown apartment building. Residents trapped on upper floors. Gary looked at his watch. He was supposed to pick up Sarah in 20 minutes. But people needed help. People needed Fartman. He made the hardest decision of his life. He called Sarah. "Hey, I'm so sorry, but something came up at work. Emergency situation. I have to cancel tonight." There was a pause on the other end. "Gary, it's Friday night. What kind of emergency happens at the DMV on a Friday night?" "It's complicated. I'm really sorry. Can we reschedule? Canada's indifference time and every common Canada's in atomments time." Another pause. "Sure, yeah, we can reschedule." She sounded hurt. Gary felt terrible, but he had to go. He hung up, suited up, ate 3 bowls of chili, and flew out the window. The apartment fire was serious. Fartman spent 2 hours helping firefighters evacuate residents, using his propulsion to reach upper floors and his enhanced strength to break through doors. He saved 12 people that night. But when he finally got home, exhausted and smelling like smoke and beans, he had a text from Sarah. "We need to talk." Chapter 7. The Truth Comes Out. They met at a coffee shop the next morning. Sarah looked tired, and Gary felt like he'd been hit by a truck. He'd barely slept, worrying about what she was going to say. "Gary, I like you," Sarah started. "I really do, but I feel like you're not being honest with me. You keep canceling plans. You're always tired, and last night you smelled like smoke and beans when you finally texted me back." Gary's heart sank. This was it. He had to tell her the truth. "Sarah, there's something I need to tell you. It's going to sound crazy, but I need you to hear me out." She nodded, waiting. Gary took a deep breath. "I'm Fartman." Sarah blinked. "What?" "I'm Fartman. The superhero. The one who saved your students." "That's me." Sarah stared at him for a long moment. Then she started laughing. "Gary, that's not funny. I'm not joking." Gary pulled out his phone and showed her pictures of his costume, his chili supply, his Amazon order history showing hundreds of pairs of underwear. "I know it sounds insane, but it's true. I eat beans. They give me power, and I can fly. That's why I keep canceling, because people need help, and I'm the only one who can help them in that specific, gas-powered way." Sarah stopped laughing. She looked at the evidence, then back at Gary, then at the evidence again. "You're serious. Completely serious. You're Fartman." "Yes, the farting superhero. Technically, I prefer gas propulsion-based hero, but yes." Sarah sat back in her chair, processing. Gary waited, his heart pounding. This was the moment. She'd either accept him or think he was completely insane. Finally, Sarah spoke. "Prove it." "What?" "Prove it. Show me." Gary looked around the coffee shop nervously. "Here? Now?" "Not here, obviously, but show me. If you're really Fartman, prove it." 20 minutes later, they were on the roof of Gary's apartment building. Gary was in full costume, flap and all. Sarah stood a safe distance away, arms crossed, looking skeptical but curious. "Okay," Gary said. "Stand back, and maybe hold your nose." He pressed the button on his belt. The flap snapped open. He concentrated, feeling the familiar pressure building from the 2 bowls of chili he'd consumed before leaving his apartment. Then he released it. The propulsion was magnificent. Gary shot into the air like a rocket, soaring up and over the building. He did a loop, then came back around, landing gracefully, well, relatively gracefully, back on the roof. Sarah's mouth was hanging open. "Oh my God. Oh my God. You're really Fartman. I told you," Gary said, slightly out of breath. "You can fly, you actually fly, by farting. It's more complicated than that. There's a whole science to it. Bean consumption, timing, trajectory calculations." But Sarah wasn't listening. She was laughing and crying at the same time. "This is the most ridiculous and amazing thing I've ever seen. You're a superhero. A real superhero. You saved my students." "I did," Gary said, feeling a surge of pride. Sarah walked over to him, still shaking her head in disbelief. "And you were afraid to tell me because?" "Because it's weird. Because I fly by farting. Because I spend hundreds of dollars a month on underwear. Because everywhere I go, people have to deploy air fresheners. What woman wants to date that?" Sarah looked at him seriously. "Gary, you save people. You risk your life to help others. You're brave and selfless, and yes, you smell like beans most of the time. But you're a hero. A real hero. That's not weird. That's incredible." Gary felt tears welling up in his eyes. "Really?" Really," Sarah smiled. "Although, we're going to need to talk about your laundry situation. 40 pairs of underwear a week is not sustainable." "I know," Gary admitted. "My Amazon driver is concerned about me." "We'll figure it out," Sarah said. Then she kissed him. It was the best kiss of Gary's life, even though he probably tasted like beans. Chapter 8. The Happy Ending. 6 months later, Gary's life had changed in ways he never could have imagined. He was still Fartman. Still saving people. Still going through underwear at an alarming rate. But now, he had Sarah by his side. She'd become his unofficial manager, helping him organize his hero schedule, negotiate a sponsorship deal with a local bean company, which helped with the chili costs, and even convinced a fabric company to donate reinforced underwear designed specifically for high-stress situations. The underwear sponsorship alone had saved Gary thousands of dollars. The company, Ironclad Undergarments, had created a special line called the Fartman Collection, underwear that could withstand forces up to 50 pounds per square inches. They sold surprisingly well, marketed as underwear for people with active lifestyles. Marcus, the Amazon driver, had been relieved to reduce his deliveries to Gary's apartment, though he still left the occasional concerned note out of habit. Gary had also gotten better at his superhero work. He'd learned to control his power more precisely, to calculate exactly how many beans he needed for different types of rescues. He'd saved hundreds of people over the past 6 months from fires, accidents, robberies, and one memorable incident involving a runaway hot air balloon. The city had embraced him. Smell and all. There was Fartman merchandise, now action figures, with spring-loaded rear flap action, t-shirts, and even a line of air fresheners called After Fartman that came in scents like Justice Breeze and Heroes Aftermath. Big Pete's Bar had become a tourist attraction. People came from all over to eat the famous chili that powered the city's most unique superhero. Pete had expanded his business and hired more staff. He'd even named a drink after Gary, the Winderson, a beer with a bean garnish. But the best part was Sarah. She'd moved in with Gary 3 months ago, and they'd converted his spare room into a hero command center, which was really just a place to store chili, costumes, and emergency bean rations. She'd also insisted on better ventilation throughout the apartment and had installed industrial-strength air purifiers in every room. "It's not that you smell bad," she'd explained. "It's that you smell powerful, and power needs proper ventilation." On their 6-month anniversary, Gary took Sarah to the roof of his building, the same roof where he'd first shown her his powers. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "I have something to ask you," Gary said, getting down on one knee. Sarah's eyes widened. "Gary." "Sarah, 6 months ago, I was just a guy who ate too many beans and had a weird superpower. But you saw past all that. You saw the hero I could be. You made me believe in myself. You even helped me solve my underwear crisis, which was really getting out of hand." Sarah laughed, tears forming in her eyes. "I know I'm not a traditional superhero," Gary continued. "I don't have a billion-dollar company or alien superpowers or a magic hammer. I have beans and determination and a really good spring-loaded flap mechanism. But I also have love for you. So much love. Will you marry me?" He pulled out a ring, a beautiful diamond that he'd saved up for by cutting back on his beer budget. A true sacrifice. "Yes," Sarah said, pulling him up and kissing him. "Yes, yes, yes, I'll marry you, Fartman." From somewhere below, they heard cheering. Gary looked down and saw Derek, Tommy, and Big Pete standing in the parking lot, looking up at them. "We knew you could do it, Gary," Derek shouted. "Congratulations, Fartman," Tommy added. "Drinks on the house!" Big Pete yelled. Gary laughed, holding Sarah close. He'd started this journey wanting to be a superhero like the ones in the movies, strong, fast, powerful. Instead, he'd become something completely different, something unique. Something that smelled like beans but saved lives anyway. He was Fartman. And he was exactly the hero he was meant to be. As the sun set over the city, Gary pressed the button on his belt. He'd worn the costume under his clothes, just in case, swept Sarah into his arms, and took off into the sky. They soared over the city together, Sarah laughing with joy, Gary's cape flapping behind them. Below, people looked up and pointed. Some held their noses. Others cheered. A few scrambled for air fresheners, but everyone agreed. Their city was lucky to have Fartman, even if he did smell terrible. Epilogue. The wedding was held 6 months later at Big Pete's bar, which had been decorated with brown and green streamers, Sarah's idea. The ceremony was beautiful, though the priest did request that Gary refrain from using his powers during the vows, for everyone's safety and comfort. Gary's Amazon driver Marcus attended as a guest, finally meeting the man behind the underwear orders. They had a good laugh about it, and Marcus admitted he'd been worried Gary was running some kind of weird underwear cult. Derek was the best man. Tommy caught the garter. Big Pete catered with his famous 15-bean chili, though he also provided a non-bean menu option for guests who didn't want to risk becoming temporary superheroes themselves. The local news covered the wedding with the headline, "Fartman ties the Knot City's most unique hero finds love." As Gary and Sarah drove away from the reception in the old Bat Civic, which Gary had kept for sentimental reasons, cans rattling behind them, Gary reflected on how far he'd come. He'd gone from a dissatisfied DMV employee with impossible dreams to a real superhero with a real superpower and a real wife who loved him despite his unusual career choice. Sure, his laundry bills were still high. Sure, he still smelled like beans most of the time. Sure, the city had to keep a strategic reserve of air fresheners for his rescues. But he was happy. He was a hero. He was Fartman. And that was more than enough. The end. I hope you like this story. Be sure to like and subscribe to Sko's Media YouTube channel for more stories and songs by Sylvester Sko Fourroux.